welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your slide tackle for a red card host, Madelyn.
I'm your traveling host, Emma.
And welcome to this week's show. It's a side quest this week, and it's my turn to choose our topic. So, as discussed, we're talking about back-to-school games.
No, we're not.
Emma was like falling leaves games, slightly chilly temperature games.
It would have been very strange host introductions if we were going into back-to-school games, I feel like.
What, you aren't just doing slide tackles in your biology class?
You know, it might be an effective way to make your way through the hallway.
It might be. You would be on the ground.
Keep low. Keep away from those germs, you know.
It'd be kind of tough if you're carrying, like, anything with you.
Yeah.
So, it's tricky. But no, we're talking about sports games. Sporty sports games. Both games that are purely sports, games with sports mini-games, minus fishing, of course. Go back and we'll listen to the fishing episode if you want to hear about fishing mini-games.
Is fishing a sport?
Isn't it?
I don't know.
You know, I guess as imagined in most fishing mini-games, it's not really being played in the, like, bass fishing competitive way. So you're right. You're right that maybe it's right to exclude those, not just because I don't want to talk about fishing games again. It's
more of a leisure activity in video games, I feel like.
Well, as the Fire Emblem kids have been talking about it that way a lot lately in my household. So yeah, you're right. Not even using bait. Serif. Anyway. So, you know, Emma and I we just talked about, you know, Mario FIFA last week on the show. And that partially inspired this. And also, I live pretty close to a sports field, so watching the kiddos return to their autumn soccer and their autumn football leagues inspired it.
What are they? The nerds? Something equivalent to that? The engineers?
I shouldn't dox myself by saying which football teams I can, like, view from my window, should I?
I can't remember what it is, but it is something, like, not football sounding, is what I remember.
That's correct. They do not have a tough sounding name.
The Geeks.
The Geeks.
Something to that effect.
I love watching the Geeks. The Geeks are playing what seems to be their first game of the season right now. Like, I'm watching them out the window. They've got the little, like, 10-yard line, like, things that they do, like the chains in football and everything. So if you hear any cheers in the background, Emma has added those in for,
Yep.
Like,
we're rooting for the Geeks on this show. So if you're listening and you're like, the Geeks, wow, that's my team. It's
then
you.
We're neighbors. But of course, Emma and I we cry, and I mean in like a battle cry kind of way all the time on the show for like, where are the more interesting sports games? Like, why does nobody ever make a sports game that isn't just like a straightforward sports game? And so I figured I should know a little bit more about the titans of the sports gaming industry before I whined about that so much.
Yeah, I think, like, the only sports game, well, like, Wii Sports and stuff, obviously, but the only one of, like, the big, like, sports simulation games, I guess, that we ever played was, we had, like, a FIFA.
It was FIFA 06.
FIFA 06. And I think that's it, really. And
FIFA 06 we played a lot of.
Yeah, we did play a lot of that, but we just did not, I don't think we ever got FIFA 07 or anything like that.
Yeah, we were definitely not like upgrading the FIFA every year kind of household for sure.
No.
I mean, obviously, yeah, Emma said we played Wii Sports, played more of the like racing type games, although
sure,
those are kind of like, I'm not going to talk too much about the racing type games today.
Racing are kind of like their own subset, I feel like.
Yeah, they've kind of broken out. Which is interesting because there are like licensed NASCAR games, right? But it's interesting that racing games have enough of a history and enough of a player base that they've not gotten eaten alive by like big NASCAR or anything like that.
People love to drive cars, you know?
Vroom vroom. So I wanted to kick things off by talking a little bit about the history of the sports game. I won't go through my whole detailed notes that I've taken here because this is not a lecture and I won't do the whole history lesson. But something that struck me in researching it is how integral sports and sports-themed games were to a lot of the early development of video games. I didn't realize that, like, I mean, of course, Pong, right?
Yeah.
But it's incredible how for the first sort of, like, 30 years or so of gaming, like, sports games are what, like, move the art form forward.
It makes sense if you think about it, I guess.
It does, right? There are games that are able to be created with limited graphical capacity. People understand the rules of them more or less already, so it's possible to do them. You can do it with a joystick and a button for most sports. It does make sense.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize that depending on how you define it, so the first ever sports video game for sure, but potentially, depending on how you define it, the first ever video game. There were other games that came out before Tennis for Two in 1958, but as several articles on Wikipedia explained it to me, it was the first game to be created sort of solely for the purposes of entertainment value.
I see.
So, debatable. There are games that exist before that, but certainly one of the first video games, if not the first, depending on your definition. Yeah, it was 1958's Tennis for Two, created by physicist William Higginbotham. And William Higginbotham was not a game designer. He was primarily into, like, nuclear non-proliferation, basically. But his lab had, like, yearly public exhibitions where, like, high schoolers and college students and members of the public would come and be like, look at some science, right? And so he created, because he thought it'd be fun for the kids, on this, like, electrical current measurement machine called an oscilloscope, like a really simple tennis game. Like, you look at it from the side. Basically, he discovered that he, like, had the technology to simulate, like, air resistance, and he was like, and drag, and he was like, that's cool, let me make a tennis game. And it was a big hit with the high schoolers who came, apparently.
Kids never change,
Kids always love the games.
They love it when you give them the video game on their little field trip.
And so you'd think that Tennis for Two would have sparked, a gaming revolution. But it didn't. They made another version of it the next year that you could play tennis on, like, the moon or Jupiter, right? You can tell this is being made by physicists because they're like, let's play with the gravity. Like, that's how we make the game better. You can play it on Jupiter. But in something I thought was funny, they like needed the computer for something else, so they dismantled the game.
Makes sense.
And then pretty much everybody forgot about it until the lawsuits with Magnavox and Atari, like, about 15 years later, where, like, basically Magnavox, which you might remember from our console generations episode, which is, like, definitely over a year old now, but is a good podcast episode, and you should go listen to it, because I feel like I learned a lot from that episode. You would too, unless you were around for all those consoles, then you can say, Madeline, you were dumb. But anyway, Magnavox being, like, one of the first, or, like, I think the first home console to ever be created, and they sued Atari for, like, stealing some of their technology. And basically some lawyers pulled out Tennis for Two to be like, see? You can't patent games! Kind of. That's a very oversimplified version. And it didn't work. But it did lead to this game being, like, pulled from the archive and becoming a part of gaming history as this, like, very early example. And yeah, this guy, like, is not, like, he's like, actually, maybe you should get rid of your nuclear weapons, but is now this sort of, like, grandfather of gaming figure. All for a tennis game. Yeah.
And now we've got games with nukes in them.
So what have you done?
Not success, I think.
Yeah. So, throughout the pre-Pong era, we see, like, there's, like, soccer games. There's, like, Taito and Sega who are doing a lot of this stuff, right? Because they're just doing a lot of games at this point. So there's, like, soccer games, first ever racing game, which had, like, a steering wheel controller. And then, of course, in 1972, probably the most iconic sports game of all time, sorry, Madden, is Atari's Pong.
Yeah. It's just air hockey.
That is the better way of describing it, isn't it? I was like, it's not. I was about to say, like, is it really a sports game? Because that's not how you play tennis. But it is pretty much just air hockey.
Yeah.
Not that
Which I don't know if air hockey is a sport, but I think it counts. It's
like,
fine.
Plenty of people describe table tennis as a sport. The table tennis is in all these sports roundups. If table tennis is a sport, air hockey seems like it could be a sport.
Yeah.
Why isn't air hockey in the Olympics?
I would watch Olympic air hockey.
Because there is Olympic table tennis.
Yeah. I think Olympic air hockey would be super intense.
That'd be a pretty fun, like, Winter Olympics. Like, have air hockey and curling in the Winter Olympics. Like, it's powerful. Mario and Sonic at the air hockey games.
Yeah.
Anyway, so throughout the 70s, like, tons of Pong clones, right? Just everybody making their own version of Pong. But also lots of, like, boringly titled sports games, like literally basketball, soccer, motocross, right? Coming out. And most of these games, it's hard to imagine, for me at least now, like, sports games that are as rudimentary looking as these games are. But they barely look like, they don't look anything like the sports games of today.
Sure, yeah.
Not even just in terms of, like, graphical fidelity, but just in terms of, like, how they're presented. Which, of course, is obvious, but yeah. I won't talk about racing games too much, but, arcade classic pole position is a sports game, is a racing game. But it's one of the very first games to feature AI. So it's just interesting to see, like, all of these kind of, like, advances in gaming technology really often being pushed forward by these sports games throughout these first few decades. And then Electronic Arts enters the scene. EA has entered the chat.
They're here to stay.
They are here to stay. So
it's in the game.
EA Sports. It's in the game.
It's in the game.
Surely they don't say it in that way. Like, that can't be how they do it anymore. But
I don't think they say it anymore, I assume.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of gone out of style, hasn't it? Like, I feel like when we were playing games in, like, elementary school, it had to be, like, a Naughty Dog creation.
Yeah. There's definitely, like, people, they show their logos, but there's a lot less, like, catchphrases or, like, signature noises, I feel like, when it comes to branding in video games
bummer,
now.
Frankly.
Yeah. Like, no, like, Sega anymore either, really.
Yeah. Boo, I say. But in 1987, EA enters the scene with Earl Weaver Basketball, which was the very first of today's genre of kind of, like, management simulator type games. Very rudimentary version of that, right? But, like, you can play a whole season of games. You don't necessarily have to play each game play by play. They had different stadiums for, like, throughout those seasons of games. So all sorts of stuff that you take for granted now and that people whine about when there are only 950 different stadiums instead of 1,000. That all dates back really to Earl Weaver Basketball. Earl Weaver Baseball. We weren't ready for basketball, really, in 1987. And then shortly after that, the first Madden comes out in 1988. I'll talk about that more later, but after a tortured development process. Tony Hawk's in there. In 1997, sports games, about 50% of console software sales. Wonder what percentage they are now.
I think it's still a significant amount.
Yeah, I mean, I would guess.
I don't know how much it is exactly, though. You'd think there's a lot, there's a lot more games now, I feel like. Yeah. So you'd think maybe it'd just be less by the fact that there's just a larger market, but I'm not actually sure.
I just, like, Madden and FIFA alone sell so many games. I think the kids outside might have scored a touchdown. Go Geeks.
Go Geeks.
So speaking of FIFA comes out for the first time in 2003. And then right after that, it's the era of exclusivity begins. So FIFA is less the case of that, as we'll talk about with soccer later. But in 2004, one guy described it, and, my pal William Higginbotham wouldn't love this, but one interview described this as a nuclear bomb in the industry.
Oh, man.
The NFL signs an exclusive contract with EA Sports, basically destroying anyone else's football games.
Yeah. At least, realistic football games, I guess.
Yes. The Blitz, where you can inject steroids, is still around for a while after that. But, yeah. Yeah,
and EA still has that exclusivity. They have it for at least the Madden. They can keep making the Madden game through at least 2026 now on their current agreement.
And printing money.
Yep.
And then in 2006, we see Wii Sports. And I really feel like since then, there haven't been, the sports franchises exist. We don't see too much beyond, obviously we'll talk a little bit about some of the weirder sports games that are out there that Emma and I want to see. But there hasn't really been any of, dominant series ascend in the way that Madden or FIFA or even, Pro Evolution Soccer or anything like that were. So it's Madden's world and we're all living in it, basically, since the mid-2000s.
I was thinking, when you brought up Wii Sports, I was thinking about, they released Nintendo Switch Sports.
I was looking at it too, I was like, did that come out?
It did come out, but it did not have very much content in it. I think it had 6 sports, and you could, only play online with 2 of them at launch.
Oh. That's the problem. I don't think Wii Sports had more than 6 sports to start.
I think it did, actually. I can't
we
quite
had Wii
remember
Sports
right now.
Resort too, though. So
right. Yeah, that's true.
So I thought it's embarrassing I didn't look up what the Wii Sports were before the sports episode, but I was relying on my memory. It's tennis, baseball, boxing, which I remember being my least favorite by far. It's embarrassing that I can only remember 3 of them.
Tennis, baseball, bowling, golf, and boxing. You're right.
It's only 5 games.
Yeah, only 5.
Man. Gamers.
So, Nintendo Switch Sports has tennis and bowling from Wii Sports and the Chambara swordplay from Wii Sports Resort.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have football, by which they mean soccer.
Yeah.
Volleyball and badminton.
Interesting.
And golf is supposed to be coming.
Okay, I see the complaints.
Yeah.
I guess. Did anyone ever play anything other than, tennis and,
what is the point of doing tennis and badminton?
I was thinking that too. I realized that there are significant differences to playing those in real life.
Yeah.
Can't quite imagine what the differences are playing them on the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, I don't know.
But look, I'm not deep in the Wii Sports meta or the Switch Sports meta, so maybe the strategies are very different.
I think, badminton's only 2 people in this, and tennis can be 4.
Ah, so badminton is tennis but worse. Got it.
Yeah, kinda.
Interesting. An intriguing choice.
Yeah.
See, I'm right now embodying the typical sports game fan, wherein I am given a game and I say, it's not good enough.
Yeah, and Wii Sports Resort had a lot. That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah, it did.
Which does feel like they should have just taken all the ones that they had previously made and just put it in the Switch one. But
yeah, what about all the models from the 3DS? They should have brought all the models over.
That's not what I meant.
I'm just kidding. Just a joke. A Pokemon sports game, that feels like an untapped market.
Well, is Pokemon actually a sports game?
Kind of. It is basically a hunting game, isn't it?
Oh, that's darker than I thought. Well, I guess I was thinking dog fighting. That's also pretty dark, but yeah.
Yeah, maybe better not to categorize it that way.
Yeah, let's not call it a sports game, actually.
We changed our minds. So I did a bit of a deep dive into like both soccer and football, by which I mean football and football.
Football and football.
Since those two are like some of the really like I think FIFA and Madden are really like the sports game franchises.
Yeah, no FIFA anymore though.
Yeah, I know. So I'll start with soccer. Yeah. So as Emma just mentioned, FIFA. Well, not really no FIFA anymore because FIFA's like we're gonna make games with like 5 different studios. We're not gonna tell you who they are.
Sure,
but
FIFA. Sure you are.
They're like we don't need AA.
We'll see how that goes for them.
Probably badly, since the
I just can't see
a bunch
them.
of mobsters anyway, right? So
yeah.
So not whatever. Like I'm sure the EA folks are not great people either, but
no,
they aren't getting like walked out of their office for corruption. So yet,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean EA has been making FIFA games for 30 years. Is that right? 30 years. Yeah. Since 1993. That's 30 years. Yeah. I'm getting old. And yeah, FIFA 23, which I guess...
Was it 1993? Wasn't it 2003?
Oh, you're right. It's not 1993. Okay.
I was worried. I was like, that seems like I am old.
You're right. FIFA's making it through 20 years.
Yeah.
And they decided basically... it's all about the licenses, right? That because they have all of these licenses with individual teams, individual leagues, and that sort of thing, that really the only thing that FIFA brings is the title and the ability to do stuff with like the World Cup, right? Because despite FIFA being, a very recognizable kind of organization, probably in many ways, like mostly off of the back of the success of these video games, right?
Yeah.
I mean, not, of course, the World Cup is a huge thing, but it would not surprise me if more people have played FIFA video games than have watched significant portions of the World Cup.
I don't know. They like made us watch it in middle school, if I remember correctly. So
okay, fair enough. But basically, EA was like, we only really ever do the World Cup as kind of like an add-on anyway. Because it's only every 4 years, so it's like a special event that we do as a seasonal update. And we don't need FIFA, and we certainly don't need to be paying them like $150 million a year for the rights. And more than that, the New York Times said that they were hoping to renew it for more than double that a year.
Yeah.
Which, on one hand, sort of reasonable. These games make a lot of money, right? Yeah. On the other hand... kind of overplaying your hand, given that you don't really hold the rights to any players or any leagues or any teams. Like the game can be the same, it just doesn't have to have the World Cup. Yeah.
I would be curious, like when they do release, they're gonna call it
EA Sports
FC. Yeah. I would be interested in like some sort of analysis between like whether that does affect their sales to like lose the FIFA name at all. I kind of don't think it will, to be honest.
Like, I just feel like FIFA buyers fall into two camps, right? People who buy it every year, who will be plugged in enough to the snooze to know to expect the title change, probably. Yeah. And people who like buy one every 5 years or whatever, or buy one once because their kid plays soccer or whatever. And those people will just buy the soccer game, right? Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of my thought too. But I would be curious to know, because I know that, like, branding's important for name recognition.
I think it'll be more interesting when, I imagine, FIFA manages to get some kind of, other FIFA branded game out there.
That's true. That's true.
Which is probably just going to be a mess, frankly.
Yeah. I mean, as someone with no stake in it, I can watch curiously from a distance and not be at all worried about it. So.
Yeah, it's like, whatever. And it's like, I'm not really rooting for FIFA to succeed, particularly here. So, seems like a good business decision to cut ties.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I didn't do that. Like, this has been happening, like, sort of over the course of the past year, basically, this has been happening. And I wasn't aware of it at all, because I'm just, like, very not plugged into the sports gaming news. But they're still they have one more FIFA that will come out, which does sound like both like it's going to be huge, but also like, wow, you hadn't been doing that already. Like, you have an annual release schedule and you haven't been doing this stuff already. Like, cross-platform multiplayer. Although not cross-generation multiplayer, but cross-platform multiplayer for the first time. Not just the Women's World Cup, but Women's Club play too. But like both World Cups. Full motion capture soccer matches as the basis of the animation, right? Like,
yeah,
some of that is cool, but it's like, that's weird that you haven't done that before.
I mean, you say like you have an annual release schedule and you haven't done this, and it's probably maybe partially because they have an annual release schedule that they haven't done any of this.
Sure. I mean, that's fair. I'm just like, man, cross-platform multiplayer? I don't know.
Yeah. To be fair, you know, that it's extra work to do that.
Of course it is. I don't mean to say, like, it's as easy as flipping a switch or anything
I
like
am
that.
surprised they haven't had it before, yeah.
It just seems like this game must make so much of its money on, like, people playing online with people. Anyway, it was fascinating to me that was, like, something they were trumpeting as, like, this is a big deal with our last hurrah here. Do the FIFA games, do you think they still have, like, boppin' soundtracks, or do you think that's over?
I hope so.
I just don't know if music licensing. I guess you must have to license, so they must have such a whole team dedicated to licensing stuff that music licensing must just be like, who even cares?
Yeah, and well, it's not like they ever, like, the ones in FIFA, it's not like they get, like, I don't know, Ariana Grande or something, you know?
Yeah.
Like, it's bands, but it's small bands. I'm looking at the song list, and I don't recognize any of them, but they sound funky.
I just remember that was, like, a real highlight of FIFA 06.
Fear No Man by Little Sims. Summer Night by Garden City Movement. Out of Lives by Aries Carter. These all sound funky,
yeah.
You know, just the titles. So, they sound like they're good bop.
Emma approves.
I haven't heard any of them, so maybe I'm wrong, but they sound good.
I will say soccer is a slightly more interesting game space than, like, say, football post the NFL exclusivity agreement. Because for a long time, Pro Evolution Soccer was a real competitor to FIFA. Basically because Pro Evolution Soccer, you know, didn't have the FIFA name, and so they put a lot of effort into the gameplay being pretty good. And FIFA was like, who cares? Like, we have all the licensed teams. And so, like, basically there was a pretty close sales rivalry up until, you know, the late aughts or so. And then somebody at EA was like, what if we did some of the stuff they're doing at PES and, like, made our games better? And then, like, they pretty much, like, left them in the dust, basically. But it's still, like, you know, Pro Evolution Soccer, well, okay, so, like, they rebranded to this, like, free-to-play eFootball version in the past couple of years. And so I was going to say, like, oh, Pro Evolution Soccer, like, it's still pretty popular, still pretty successful. And, like, it is, but everybody hated eFootball. Did you look at the pictures? Did you remember these pictures?
I did not look at the pictures.
You should look while I talk about this. Find the ones of their faces.
Konami is just, yeah.
I mean, they're a slot machine company, right? So, like...
Yeah, they are just a slot machine company now, yeah.
But yeah, look at those guys' mouths. Like,
yeah, they're very scary.
I feel like I remember these images a little bit, actually. I was like, this seems vaguely familiar, that this game had really, really, really bad graphics issues.
Yeah.
I mean, mostly in cinematics, but, like, they're really bad. So, you know, for a long time there was a real competitor, and now it's like they're not really playing on the same pitch to do a soccer thing there.
It's a soccer pitch? I guess so.
In the UK, anyway.
Oh, I see. The football pitch, yeah. Yes.
But it's still, like, there's, like, not a comparable, like, second-tier football franchise. Or, like, second-tier... I don't know, I don't think there's really a second-tier basketball franchise to 2K either, really.
Yeah, I don't think so either, yeah.
So it's interesting that in, like, the soccer space, that's, like, one of the few places where it's, like, there was a serious competitor, even though... And I think that's partially because, like, FIFA can't be, like... like, they can be, like, you can't have the World Cup, but they can't be, like, you can't have the Premier League, right? It's not like there was an exclusivity thing there.
Yeah. Yeah, because with American football, it really is just the NFL, right?
Yeah.
Which makes sense. It is American football, I guess. Not really an international sport the same way that soccer is.
Yeah.
And basketball, I know there's leagues in other countries, obviously. But again, just it's American. This sort of feels American-centric.
Yeah.
In the branding department.
Definitely. There's also Football Manager. Football Manager is also a pretty popular series, but that's not, like, you don't play the games in Football Manager. It's just a management sim. But I really loved FIFA 06.
Yeah, we had fun, yeah.
Maybe if they just re-released FIFA 2006, I'd buy that.
That would be very weird. I feel like that would be a weird business choice.
It would, wouldn't it?
Like, specifically 06. I don't know anything about, like, the like, meta ranking or whatever.
I don't either. I'm sure
of the games against each other.
One.
If there's, like, strong opinions on that matter.
Well, should I move to American football? We're talking about American football a little bit.
Sure, tell us about Madden.
I sure will. So, Madden, as I mentioned a little earlier in the episode, Madden had, like, a really awful, like, 3 to 4 year initial development process. Basically, because they were like, we're gonna make a football team game. So, like, let's go to this, like, Super Bowl winning football coach, John Madden, and, like, let's get his, like, sign off on it. So it's, like, a legit football game, and, like, we can, like, take his plays and stuff and use his plays, right? And most football games at the time were not, so like a normal football team plays 11v11. Mm-hmm. But most football games at the time were doing more like 8 or 9. Basically because computers could not handle 11v11. And also because, like, and to some extent, players of the game couldn't handle 11v11. Yeah. It's complicated. I mean, football is a complicated game, and so, like, people just... you know, especially, I don't know, I feel like access to, like, all football content all the time has grown a lot since the start of Madden, right? So just, like, the knowledge of that wasn't really there, and so, like, people could get overwhelmed. But John Madden was like, you can't put my name on it unless it has 11 players, because that's not football if it's not 11 players. So basically it took them years and years and years to, like, be able to do it. And, like, they kept, like, they had Bethesda work on it for a while, and then there was some, like, acrimony there, and, like, the guys that created it were like, this was an awful time in our lives. Like, just bleak and pain. All pain. But it did eventually come out in 1988, and John Madden paid for his, you know, insistence on 11 players and ruining these men's, like, lives for several years by passing on the opportunity to buy some EA stock, as much EA stock as he wanted, in 1988. So, which he has said he regrets.
Yeah.
Oh well, dude. Probably pretty rich just from whatever.
Yeah, he's probably fine.
Whatever cut of the Madden games he gets is probably good enough.
Yeah.
John Madden also claims he is not very good at the game.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Why does it make sense?
He played a lot of football, you know?
I like that. I thought you were going to be like, oh, it doesn't really translate or whatever. But you're like, nope, his brain is bad.
Sorry. I know that's probably not, that's too dark of a joke, probably, but...
It is interesting though. So like Madden became very popular, and like of course when they got the exclusive NFL license, that was like pretty much it for any other football game. Even before that, like they released a version in the early 90s for the Genesis that like drove Sega Genesis sales incredibly because it was, and like there was something that was like it helped kill the Dreamcast because they didn't release it on the Dreamcast. But it was really interesting to me to read a lot of stuff about like its impact. And this is so funny, right? Because there's so many games that people make that are like, this is art and I want to have an impact on people and I want to have like an impact on the culture and like make a statement, right? And you would never look at Madden and be like, Madden is like a game that has an impact on like society, right? But
sure.
like in some ways I think there's a case to be made that like Madden is maybe one of the most impactful games that's ever been released.
Sure, yeah.
Because there are just countless interviews and think pieces and whatever about people who are like, I got interested in football. I learned how to play football like by playing Madden. Like I learned what plays were from Madden. Like from NFL players. There's all this stuff that's like more than half of NFL players like play Madden, which is like super weird, right? Imagine if I was playing like Broadway Simulator, but like
I mean, if there was a Broadway Simulator, wouldn't you play it?
Like I would, but I don't know. Like I don't know. That's a management sim I'd like to see. Somebody make Broadway Tycoon for me.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just like it influences a lot of the ways that people actually play. Like the idea of like there was one article that I read on like Madden's anniversary that was like, you know, there was a play where it's like the guy ran out the clock by like running along the goal line because he was so far ahead of people and not going in, and they're like, that's from Madden. Like nobody did that. Like that's a Madden trick. So it's wild to be like you wonder about what football fandom would look like without a game like this that is like so popular and in many ways like taught people like how to play football and what it is. Which makes me wonder, like, maybe we should just have Madden instead.
Yeah. To be honest.
Like, everybody loves Madden. I mean, they don't. People whine about it a lot, but and the most recent ones have not been necessarily well received. But everybody buys Madden anyway. Maybe we should just wait until the graphics get pretty good, get good enough. You know, they can't look like eFootball.
Yeah.
Maybe they can, honestly. Like, that might be a little more fun. But maybe we should just do Madden.
I think that's probably safer and healthier. So...
But Emma, video games are destroying the children.
You're less likely to get a traumatic brain injury playing Madden. You might get some eye strain or like some carpal tunnel, but less likely to get 5 concussions.
That is another interesting
in a row.
Madden thing that I read that was like, you know, at some point in the 2010s, like players would start getting concussions and then like you couldn't use them ever again in Madden sometimes. Which on one level is like, oh, like what a kind of a like not progressive, right? But like sort of critical and interesting thing to include. But on the other hand is like, this whole game is a propaganda tool for the NFL, really.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, it's them looking like, it's like them being like, oh, we care about this, it's serious. Without, you know, really actually changing anything.
Yeah.
But the Madden curse seems to have gone away. Had you heard of the Madden curse before?
I had heard of the Madden curse, yes.
Yeah, for the past 5 or so years, it's not really been a thing. But it is sort of striking. It is really striking in, like, the 2010s or so. Like, Ben, like, yeah, really, really was that every year the person who was on the cover of Madden did have a season-ending injury.
You know, to be fair, if you're a very famous star football player who's playing a lot of football, it does seem like, you have a higher proportional chance to get a season-ending injury than someone who wouldn't be on the cover of Madden. Does that make sense?
I guess that's true, right? It's like, okay, it's usually like star quarterbacks, star running back types who are on the cover of Madden. And you're right. You do wonder, like, what percentage of those people have season-ending injuries on any given NFL season.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of funky.
Yeah.
It's still like a funky video game trivia piece.
Yeah. Funky trivia. Injuries.
When was is Tom Brady? Tom Brady's not on the cover now, right? Tom Brady was like on the cover last year or something like that.
I don't know, but I keep seeing ads for him on Hulu being like, sometimes you need a break.
Yeah, but then he's
I'm
like,
coming back. I had my break. He's like selling cars.
His wife doesn't seem too pleased from what I've seen.
Yeah.
But he can't stay away.
Apparently
Maybe
not.
She should buy him Madden. Be like, Tom.
I think she should introduce him to Madelyn.
You're gonna love this. I also really liked that apparently players will complain about their like skill rankings a lot.
Of course they will.
One thing was like only one player has ever written in to be like he was ranked too high. It's like good for you for your honesty, dude.
Yeah.
Honestly, football games in general, like, this is so weird, but it's like, football games in general have more of an impact on the world than, like, any other game, because the NCAA game is also, like, the beginning of, like, totally changing what it is to be a college athlete. Okay, so there used to be, and there will be again, EA, they're not calling it EA College Football 23, they're not calling it NCAA. EA College Football 23 is coming back, probably actually in 2023. Even though, like, usually these games come out in, like, the fall for the next year.
Right.
But they used to make, and they were very popular. I think that in many ways they were, like, considered to be better games, sometimes than the Madden games. EA used to make NCAA football games, and basketball games, too, I think. Maybe hockey as well, but mostly football and basketball. And these games didn't... So, if you know anything about college athletics and, like, the controversy around that. The NCAA makes like probably billions of dollars, right? But certainly hundreds of millions of dollars each year, you know, broadcasting, televising, merchandise, etc. You know, on the backs of these like college athletes. But these college athletes are amateurs. They are students and they are amateurs. And you can give them scholarships and you can, like, give them PlayStations and stuff. But no money. No money. And that has only just barely begun to change, although the NCAA is still sort of, like, reviewing what it is. This episode is a sports podcast, but if you want more information about the ins and outs of the compensation fight for college athletes, you're probably on the wrong show. But some of that really, I think, kicked off with, so, like, these games from EA, they didn't use people's names, right? So if I'm, like, you know, Madelyn Football playing, and I'm the starting quarterback for a college team, right? You wouldn't have a player called Madelyn Football in the game, but you would have a player that had was my height and my weight and my jersey number and my hometown and looked kind of like me.
Madelyn Bootball.
Madelyn Bootball. And so, like, reasonably, some student athletes were a little upset about that because these NCAA football games and basketball games were making a lot of money, but they were seeing none of it, even though they were, like, the content in the game. So there were some lawsuits around that in 2015, which, kind of launched this larger conversation. And for what it's worth, like, there's plenty of things to, like, demonize EA about over the course of their history, right? But, like, EA apparently did, like, lobby the NCAA, like, many times to say, can we pay people? for their likenesses in the game. Because these games make a ton of money, right? Like, they can throw, like, a few $1 million at licensing likenesses.
Yeah, I mean, part of it for them is probably, like, they can make these fake versions of them, but it would be better if they had likenesses, but I don't think they're legally allowed to do it unless they can pay the person themselves, obviously. So it is partly self-serving.
No, it's 100% self-serving, of course. I just want to be clear that it's, like, it wasn't so much that they were like, yeah, we want to, like, create the 95% version of this, and, like, that's our ideal, and we would...
Yeah.
We want to do that and not pay people. It was like they were like, we would prefer to have actual licenses and pay for it, but the NCAA was like, no, amateurism, it ruins it if they're paid, kind of situation. So they did end up having to settle this lawsuit, and so that meant that, like, every player who had been in the games did get a payout of about, like, $400.
Oh, good.
Which is itself kind of wild, right? It's like, there you are, $400.
Buy yourself a PlayStation and a copy of the NCAA game.
Right? That was wild to me, because I sort of felt like when I saw the payout was like $40 million, I was like, that's not a lot of money for how much these games surely made.
Yeah.
And yeah, the idea that it's like, they're like, it ranged from, like, I'm sure by, like, how many times people appeared in the game, from like $100 to, like, about $1,000 as a payout, but average about $400 a player. Which really puts it in perspective, like, why they wanted to pay the license. Like, if they were going to be able to do it for, like, $400 a person, like, whatever. Like, one article I read about this was like, this game sells millions of copies a year. They'd have to sell, like, another, like, 80,000 copies to pay for it. It's like, presumably you would, just from these people's moms buying a copy of the game.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a joke, but
not really, though.
I know, if I was in a video game, I'd probably buy, like, 10 copies. Madelyn and Fruitball was in a game. But a lot of things around this have changed. I mean, in the NCAA since that lawsuit settled in 2015. Like I said, it's still sort of in flux, but people are starting to seem like they can license name, image, and likeness rights, NIL rights, as you'll see across a lot of these articles. And so while the EA College Football in 2023 won't have, well, at least right now, is not planned to have specific athletes, they have now licensed, it will be, like, most of the schools and, like, their uniforms and stuff. So it's kind of going back to what it was, except that maybe in the future they'll be able to license, like, actual people.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like now I know much more about, like, what the sports games that are out there are.
Yeah. Yeah, I did a little bit of, not really about, like, the history of the NBA games, but I was just looking at, like, if you were looking for more of, like, a sports RPG, right? Like, all of these, all the sports games have, like, single-player modes.
Yeah.
Where either you're, like, a manager for a club, or a fake player, rising through the ranks. But most of them are more sort of superficial stuff. Like, there's a very light framing, and then you're just another way to play single player games, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
But the NBA 2K games put a lot of work into their My Career sections. Like 2K22, 2K22,
2K22,
2K22
2K22
is, like, combining, like, the idea of, they introduced the city in 2K21, I guess, which is, like, an open space you can explore, and now they're, like, combining My Career and the city into, like, a immersive sort of RPG experience. So, like, there's, like, quest-based stuff now. So you can do side quests in city locations. and make it into like an interactive sort of adventure. So they're working on making that deeply involved now, which is fascinating to me.
It's so interesting, especially because I'm on here on the show being like, where are the different sports games, the interesting sports games all the time? And I hear about this 2K My Career, and I'm like, on one hand, that's cool. On the other hand, who wants this?
It's weird, right? I don't know why, theoretically, My Career at least sounds like something that I would find really interesting.
Yeah.
But for some reason, I'm just like, but is it really? Like,
yeah.
You know?
I think that's it. It's that I'm skeptical. I'm like, I don't actually believe this is going to be a good RPG.
Yeah.
And I think that what I want from games like FIFA, Madden, NBA 2K is more like, I want the manager mode, but I want it to be like a little more expansive, right? It's like, I want to take my player to press conferences, and I want to maybe do brand photo shoots and whatever. I don't know, which I know is part of this.
2K does have some of that.
I know, but I don't necessarily want to just be like running around the streets. I don't know.
No, I mean, it has like 2K 15 and stuff has like press conferences and relationship building you can do with your fellow players and like your coach and stuff.
Yeah.
16 was apparently done by Spike Lee, at least in name, I guess.
So
although people didn't like that one, apparently. Yeah. It was a little bit too movie-like.
I guess I just sort of feel like I don't know if I welcome this kind of evolution from the like truly AAA sports games.
Well, I mean, what's interesting to me is it's not. They've always been doing this in the basketball games, and I just haven't been paying any attention to it.
So I guess it is something that people want. That's so interesting. Well, shout-outs to NBA 2K, I guess.
Yeah.
But it is, like, you have a nice list here of, like, other funky sports games.
Yeah.
Because they are out there.
Yeah. Like, Pyre and Dodgeball Academia, which are the two I put here first, because they are on my backlog.
And
I own both of them, and I'm like, I need to play these. And then I don't, even though every week on this podcast, I'm like, where are my sports RPGs? You know? And then I don't play them when I play them. That's my own personal problem.
Yeah. I do find it interesting that, like, and like, if you're gonna make a funky sports game, it has to be golf.
I feel like golf is turn-based, right? Which I do feel like is easier to make.
Yeah.
Which is possibly why there is so much golf.
Curse to golf.
Just because, like, you don't have to... You have AI, but you don't have to worry about, like...
Yeah.
AI player interaction necessarily that much, you know?
No, it's true. It's a way to still have a game where it's like you're actually playing the sport. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be like, like live action. Yeah. Still, I did think it was funny that, like, I could think of no less than 4 off the top of my head, like, funky golf games. Yeah. And that's not even including, like, Mario Golf or anything like that.
Yeah. Barbie Golf.
Which, by the way, it really is very funny that Mario... Like, I was like, the big ones are FIFA and Madden and 2K. But Mario. And Mario.
The most important sports league.
Which is so funny.
The Mario League.
Do you think if FIFA licensed Mario, like, that would... Like, maybe that's how they could compete with EA?
FIFA Mario?
They had, like, the FIFA... It was, like, World Cup, but it was, like, Mario's there, too.
Maybe.
I feel like that's what they should think about it. That's all I'm saying.
They should think about it, yeah.
There is sort of a growing category of, like, you know, massive multiplayer, free-to-play sports games, right? It's like, you put Rocket League on here, right?
Yeah.
Which, you know, like, that does sort of feel like, in some ways, the limit of what you can do with a funky sports game while it still is, like, a simulation sports game, right? It's like, let's play soccer with cars.
Yeah.
Same thing with, like, Knockout City, which is the, like, dodgeball one, right? It just feels like if your game is going to be, like, live in that way, competition in that way, there is only so much you can do without inventing your own sport.
Yeah. Which, by the way, it was very hard to search for, like, in-game sports.
Yeah, I mean, this episode was also partially inspired by me, like, getting very into the baseball and, like, drone racing in Judgment.
Yeah. But, like, you put like, in-game sports, it's, like, sports
FIFA.
games. Or, like, games that have sports in them. It's, like, esports. Our video game sports. It's like, no, I just want to know the Fruitballs of the world.
So yeah, that
just give me a list.
You only on that list get games from the, like, Doctor's standbys. All that's there.
Because I was like, you know, like, what games? I was thinking about Lost Judgment, which, like, the side stories that are sport, like they don't have soccer or basketball or anything, but they have, like, boxing. And, like, they have, like, storylines that sort of are like, that's what I want out of, like, a sports game, you know? Yeah. Like, in a small package. And I was like, are there any other games out there like that? And it was impossible to find.
Look, Yakuza 5 is where you want to be. We've got street drag racing in a taxi. We've got hunting in the tundra. Dance, if you want to count Haruka's Idol thing. I won't count that, though. And then we got a whole baseball arc in the end. Actually, a lot of the Yakuza games have, like, baseball side story arcs.
Yeah.
And fishing. Look, I'm just saying, it's there. But Fruitball and Struggle are really top tier.
Struggle is such a funny game. Smack your opponent until the marbles they're holding fall on the ground.
Do you think anyone plays that in real
I don't
life?
know how you would do it in real life.
I don't know.
Like, how would that function? I don't know.
You'd have to have, like, Velcro suits. Maybe.
You
got, like, balls all over them. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It takes some creativity.
But I would like to see, I mean, something that I do really feel like, I don't know, holds the sports, well, part of what holds the sports game genre as a whole back is that all the big series are on annual release schedules.
Yeah.
And so they just don't ever really do anything. Like, that's why I'm like, oh my god, cross-platform multiplayer, right? They don't ever really do anything new, and they're really just concerned with being a marketing tactic for, the various leagues and clubs.
Yeah.
Which is fine. But it definitely does mean that there's, like, not a lot of space for innovation. And, like, frankly, for that audience, like, you really wouldn't want a lot of innovation anyway, right? Like, what are you going to do to make Madden that much better? Press conferences, I guess. But what are you going to do to make it that much better? Like, nothing. It's football. There's not that much you can do. But I do think it's interesting that so many games get kind of, like, stuck in this, like, it does have to simulate the sport. Because I can see why that holds it back, right? Like, if you have to make a decent football simulation game, like, that's hard enough already.
Yeah.
Without putting, like, a roguelike on top of it or whatever.
I just want, what I really want personally deep in my heart is just Fire Emblem Three Houses, but sports.
I really feel like there's a market for that.
That's what I want. That's the game that I want. If someone makes that game, I will be there. That's all I'm saying.
But would they play sports? Like, what would be the battles portion?
Yeah, no, there'd be sports matches.
Okay.
Like, okay, think about Fire Emblem Three Houses, right? Like, you can train certain aspects of, like, a player's abilities.
Okay.
You could do a battle on a week. Those would be scrimmages, right?
Okay, yeah.
And then, like, every month you have, like, a big match.
Okay, I see it.
And that, you know, it might get a little bit more complicated because probably, like, how you do in your match would have to affect, like, how the story goes, essentially.
Yeah.
But essentially, like, having that structure, sticking a sport into it, and then thinking out how that would change it a little bit, I feel like would make a pretty effective sports game. In any sport. Make up a sport. Whatever. I want to experience the epic highs and lows.
I feel like there's a space for a sports roguelike too, like kind of like a deck based kind of thing.
Sure.
Like where you don't actually like. I'm thinking of like you're a football player and like you have to make it to the end of your career, kind of thing. Right? That's kind of a dark way of approaching it. But, like, the idea being that, like, you aren't as beholden to, like, me actually having to play the game so much as, like, there are
sort
events.
of like a racing sim, you mean?
Yeah, like a racing sim. Like Monster Rancher.
Yeah. I've sort of... There's this, like, Long Live the Queen, I think. That's, like, you have a character... And you have to, like, build her skills as she's the queen and try to live past a certain point without someone killing you. That's sort of what I'm thinking about, but football.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's good. And, like, that's interesting, right? It's, like, I could really be, like, Monster Rancher, where it's, like, you just, like, you're a coach, and, like, you continue to take on, like, a new player every time your old player dies or has a career-ending injury. Or retires, I guess. And you have to, like, move up the ranks. I feel like there's something there.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is not a podcast where we have to come up with game ideas at the end. But I would just like to see, I'd like to see more people do, like, genre with sports and try it.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that those are sort of out there. And probably what I'm really lamenting here is just the death of, like, AA games, basically.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'm sure that there are indie games out there that are doing many of these kinds of things. But I would like to see one that is a little bit bigger than those experiences can sometimes be.
Yeah.
So do you feel sporty?
I'm feeling so sporty. You know, every once in a while I'm like, maybe I should join, like, a sports league so that I get out and get exercise. And then I'm like, this seems like a hassle, and I don't do it.
You should do it.
But it seems like such a hassle.
You could just join, like, a Madden league.
Also, I still don't feel comfortable, like, going in stores, so maybe sports is still not great for me.
Sports is outdoors, usually sometimes.
Sure, but you're, like, in each other's faces, you know.
I guess that's true. Maybe after your next boost.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we have good old-fashioned sports game Pokemon to play.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, listeners, do you have a favorite sports game or sports game franchise? Are you a Madden devotee? Do you buy the latest FIFA game or EA Soccer FC game every year? Are there funky sports games that are out there that give us what we want that aren't NBA My Career, which gives us what we want and we say, not this, not like that.
Not this one, though.
If you have recommendations or thoughts or feelings to share, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games in the hat, or check out our blog featuring long-running series, Split Screen, and Click My Boyfriend, and Emma's periodic personal blogs. Finally, and most importantly, if you enjoyed the show, why you should subscribe. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, basically wherever you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. There's really enough material for a whole other sports show if we wanted. We didn't talk about wrestling games or like boxing games or very much about basketball or hockey is popular. There's so many sports games that are out there. But next week, it's back to our main editions where we are playing.
Do you remember what the games are?
Are you just saying that I remember what the games are?
Do you remember what the games are?
Is this a test, or is it because you don't remember?
I feel like you should remember at least one.
Epic Mickey.
Yeah.
And the other one.
2 Point Campus.
2 Point Campus. I knew it wasn't. I'm looking at the list, right? I was like, it's not Triangle Strategy. It's not the Stanley Parable. It's not The Last of Us Part 1. It's not Multiverses.
I feel very funny, by the way, putting The Last of Us Part 1 in the new games. I thought it was very funny.
It's pretty funny.
Yeah.
It's crazy that they just invented storytelling here in the year 2022.
Yeah.
Reinvented storytelling.
Yeah.
Well, tune in for that next week. And then for Emma's side quest in 2 weeks, which will be about back to school games.
Yeah, probably that.
Autumn leaves games.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chill in the air games.
Do you want to sign us off, Madelyn?
I sure do. Listeners, I hope this week you score a hat trick of a week.